Many women who struggle to have healthy relationships with their mothers do not address these things publicly or to most people in general because there's such a stigma around women who suffer from dysfunctional relationships with their mothers or parents in general. So this issue is almost too embarrassing for people to talk about. And I'm at a point in my journey where it doesn't feel disloyal to speak on these things. A lot of women who suffer silently and keep quiet about their relationships with their mothers because it feels embarrassing that you don't have a mom that you can talk to on a regular basis or that you have a close connection with. There's also a lot of women who have what they believe are healthy relationships with their mothers, and they're actually toxic, dysfunctional, codependent in nature, but it's just framed and miscategorized as love. So it is not something that a lot of us see clearly, and therefore it is, again, not talked about. Now, those of us who do have dysfunctional relationships with our mothers can often trace it back to their mothers. So this becomes a generational issue. But again, because it's not addressed, because it's categorized as normal, it's categorized as love, it's something that we do not speak about and do not address properly. So today we are talking about what it's like to have to heal those mother wounds, to reparent yourself, what that conversation looks like when you're ready to unpack it within yourself, even if you're not in a space where it is safe enough to do it with your own mother. Now, as somebody who has experienced this and had to unpack and heal my own mother wounds, I also give grace to women who are not in a place where they can do this. And so they hide it or they carry forward the trauma. There are many women who suffer from mother wounds, who suffer from dysfunctional relationships with their mothers, men as well, but I am specifically talking to women because I am a woman. And they go out into the world and they are mean. They are unkind, they are desperate, they are cruel, they are insecure. And a lot of times those wounds stem from their relationship with their mother. But because we live in a society that feels like father wounds and daddy issues are the main culprit of imbalanced or dysfunctional people, we often overlook the relationship that we have with our mothers and the massive impact that it can have on our life, on the way that we see ourselves, on the successes, the things that we strive for, the children, the relationships, anything that we touch emotionally, psychologically, mentally, financially can oftentimes stem back to those first relationships that we've had with our mothers. So the first thing is that this is not a video to bash either A, women who are mean because they have mean mothers and who are unkind to other women because they suffer from high levels of insecurity because of their relationships with their mothers. This is not a video to bash my own mother or mothers who have not done the inner work necessary to heal the relationship with their own mothers. A, because their mothers have passed away. B, because they are too afraid of addressing these issues with their mothers, or because they're in denial. There are a lot of mental health issues that stem from these dysfunctional relationships. And when they're not addressed, they do carry forward. And when you have someone who is brave enough in a lineage, in a family dynamic, who wants to address those things and heal them within themselves in order for them to not be passed down to their own daughters, that's not easy work. And so I do give grace to women who are in this position where they do not feel comfortable or strong enough to do it. And I also feel like, as someone who had to do the work independent of that relationship, and I had to guide myself in many areas regarding this, I also give grace to women who are struggling to find those maternal support systems within their life. And I hope that this conversation can be one in which, regardless of what side of the fence you're sitting on, that you can feel open enough and safe enough to explore this within yourself if you are someone who needs to heal your own mother wounds, or you are someone who is the direct descendant of somebody who did the inner work. Knowing that that's not easy gives space for both sides of the conversation. You may be someone who didn't even realize that you had a dysfunctional relationship with your mom, or that she was jealous of you or envious of you until certain things in your life, certain traumas, certain revelations occurred in which you could no longer ignore the things that were glaringly obvious in your relationships. Also understanding that the relationships that we have with our mothers, especially as daughters, has a massive impact on the way that we see ourselves, the way that we navigate life, the relationships that we decide to have in our spaces, friendships that we have, the relationships that we have with our siblings or cousins or female-centered groups in our lives are going to stem from that first initiation into womanhood. As someone who has daughters, I know how important it is to have a strong base for my daughters to return back to. But I also know how important it is for me to show them the vulnerability and the beauty of being open as a woman. Not pretending that I know all the answers or have everything figured out is at the core of my relationship with my daughters. And there were certain milestones in their own life that made me aware of how limited my relationship with my own mother was. And I know that she struggled with her relationship with her own mom. So again, I completely understand. I also am just not in a space where that is more important than my own mental health, my own emotional health. And so as you're navigating these spaces, especially if you're someone who is at that junction point where you want to heal the parts of you that need the healing, but you're also almost holding on to your identity of being the daughter of a mother. That's a difficult emotional space to navigate through. And when you think you're alone, when you think that no one else has that same tumultuous relationship with their own mother, you think you're alone. And it makes you feel shame, fear, guilt, confusion. So I think it's important to speak on these things and learning to unpack them in a way that feels safe enough to hold space for yourself and the things that you desire to say, the truths that you want to acknowledge within those relationships, while also holding space for the part of you that feels like it's uncomfortable to say them out loud. I remember when I was in school, I wrote a paper on this subject because it was something that was so prevalent in my life, and I really wanted to explore the psychological impact of mother-daughter relationships. And what I found so surprising was how many studies that had been done on this subject and how many people suffered from dysfunctional relationships with their mothers. And it shouldn't be surprising, right? Because obviously your parents are people, but when you're growing up, you're not given the room to see them as just people. They hold a title, and the weight of that title has massive impacts and elements of control over your own life and the trajectory of your life. But the truth is, they are just people. Our mothers are just people, people who have not had honest conversations with themselves. They are people who are hiding from their own traumas. They are people who are embarrassed about their own mistakes. And when the shame of that is so heavy, the ability to openly communicate that is difficult. And so how do you hold space for somebody who doesn't even want you to hold space for them? How do you have a conversation with someone who is uncomfortable with the truth when it doesn't feel good in their body? So oftentimes that process of reparenting and healing your mother wounds is literally solo. It's without your mother. And because we have a tendency as children to blame ourselves, to think that everything is our fault, and the reason why we have a dysfunctional relationship with our mother is because we did something wrong, that process of unlearning as an adult often stems back to the ideologies that you held as a child while you were navigating life and trying to figure it out. And if you're in the same unique position of healing mother wounds while also simultaneously being a mother yourself, you can understand the unique path that you walk of trying to actively unpack but also not re-traumatize another member of your lineage. And I commend you for that because it's not easy. And the awareness of saying that I will do it differently than my own mother is big. And it's ironic as well because parenting is not easy and trying to do things the right way is not easy. So I understand how mothers who are dysfunctional really think they're doing it differently than their mothers, and they really do believe that they navigated that space in a more delicate, aware way than their mothers did. And they could be right. You know, they could have done it completely differently. but that doesn't mean that they did it 100% the right way for you. And if your relationship with your parent was one in which you are only a child and always a child and your thoughts and feelings and emotions are irrelevant, that relationship can only grow as far as their growth. A lot of times, our mothers who have had dysfunctional relationships with their moms, their level of awareness is often limited. For me, the irony of wanting to dedicate a huge chunk of my life to helping other women when the people who have harmed you the most were women is so funny to me. And yet it is something I genuinely desire to do. I have had many women in my life who were strangers to me, who absolutely hated me. And the common thread that I saw within them is that they had absolutely dysfunctional relationships with their own mothers. There are a lot of women who go out into the world and they're so insecure, and the attachment style that they have with their own moms is so damaged that every relationship that they seek out after that point is to heal that relationship. The attention that they desire, that they're lacking, the feelings of envy that they have towards other women because somehow you're getting the attention, stems back to childhood. Having a mother who pit her kids against each other, that was constantly trying to make them choose sides, is going to inevitably create a relationship with themselves that is not healthy, where they're constantly seeking external factors to satisfy a wound that is internal. And if you're someone who has high levels of resiliency and strength and courage and awareness and empathy, your ability to navigate that toxic space will be more successful than your peers who are incapable of doing that. So the outcome will look very different. This is why you have women who have really terrible relationships with their moms, but they're the kind of woman that would help another woman in need at the drop of a hat. And then you have women who have very dysfunctional relationships and they are out for blood with women like this. They are constantly seeking to destroy and diminish another woman's light. And I'm not saying this stuff so that we can somehow see it from their perspective and then dismiss the way that we feel or how we have felt at the hands of women like this. I'm saying it like this so that we can recall our own power back, so that we can remember what it feels like to be able to see multiple perspectives at once, because then you're not held captive to any which one. The greatest revenge is your happiness. The greatest revenge is your success. And that comes from being able to focus on the things that you desire for yourself, that internal conversation. When you are able to heal the parts of yourself that have been damaged by the people closest to you, your ability to navigate emotional, psychological, mental spaces elevates to a whole new level. You want to give yourself grace. You want to say to yourself that it is not your fault that you have a relationship like this with your mother. You want to also say to yourself that there wasn't something wrong with you and why she chose you to attack or be against. Unfortunately, when people aren't able to see themselves clearly, and whether you believe that's through understanding yourself or you're someone who believes in God and you say it's that image that God has of you, either way, there is a diminished view of self. And so the things in you could easily trigger your mother to see you a certain way, and the same things that triggered her mother to see her a certain way. So when we're healing that part of ourselves, we want to first acknowledge that it wasn't our fault, that there isn't something we did wrong, and to detach the treatment that we receive from our mothers from our self-worth and our self-identity. Healing that relationship that you have with yourself is a very crucial step in allowing yourself to navigate that space with more grace and more love and more awareness. Mother wounds often come with sister wounds as well, especially if you grew up in a household with sisters, because if you are healing mother wounds from a toxic or narcissistic parent, then the relationship that you have with your siblings is always going to be under attack, because that individual at the helm does not want either of you to find safety within each other. So depending on that relationship, there will be a hierarchy. One person who is considered the scapegoat or the golden child, where all of the attention is going towards that child. So oftentimes when you're healing these wounds, you're also having to understand that there are going to be a lot of relationships that are frayed because they were impacted heavily by that relationship that you had with your mother. Also acknowledging that when we start to stand up for ourselves in these relationships, when we go out into the world and there are other relationships that mirror that dynamic that you have with your mother, they will hide in plain sight. You can have friends like this, you can have coworkers like this, you can have relationships like this. A lot of times when we say I went out and I married my parent, right? Most of the time we're talking about a man and we're saying that we married our fathers. But you can absolutely have married someone who is very similar to your mother. This is not gender specific. You can be a man who went out and found someone who is just as toxic as your mother, or you could be a woman who went out and found someone who is just as toxic as your mother. When you start to see that the relationships that you coveted, the relationships that you held in high regard or just felt like needed to be protected, they were safe, they could do no wrong, when you start to see that the behaviors of those people mirrored the behaviors of your toxic mother, it changes your perspective on why you keep people around longer than you should. Because it was considered normal, because it was considered acceptable to have your mother behave like this. It's also super confusing because if this is your mother who is, right, mother is synonymous with love, cuddling, Mother's Day, caring, nurturing, and their behavior is the complete opposite and you're trying to normalize it, you are going to go out into the world and what you think is love, you are going to misinterpret abuse, toxicity, lying, controlling as love. And that is not just romantic partnerships. We can do this 100% with friends. And then when you're realizing that you shouldn't be in these relationships, that they're not healthy, but you're not tying it back to that start and what was considered normal and acceptable, it just compounds the amount of shame and guilt that we feel. It makes us feel like we're drowning in endless dysfunction. Healing your mother wounds is like any other part of yourself that needs to be healed. We want to acknowledge it. We want to get those feelings identified and out, either on paper or being able to say them out loud. Because the more that we can name it, the less fear we have that's associated with it. The less we have an emotional tie or reaction to those things. This is why even when we talk about the healing process being a spiral, where you feel like you're returning to the same points of impact, but you're ascending, you're becoming more aware. The way that you would normally react to certain situations, you're not reacting the same way because there's growth. You're expanding your amount of your levels of awareness. You're expanding the language that you have in order to identify certain feelings and certain emotions. So we want to change the way that we think as well about these relationships, about this dysfunction, about these experiences. And it sounds a lot simpler, and I'm not trying to diminish the process and how difficult that is. I just want you to know, as someone who had to do it myself, that there is hope on the other side. There is an ability to put this down and not have to carry it into different aspects of your life. The process of reparenting yourself for you could look like replaying those certain things in your mind and changing the narrative around them. Instead of thinking that you were stupid or dumb or it wasn't okay for you to do those things, or it wasn't okay for you as a child to have those questions that you had or experience the things that you did, lovingly rewriting that story is so important. It could also mean that because you weren't allowed to have certain things or do certain things, you're now giving yourself the room to do it as an adult. This is why I also talk about when we're putting ourselves together, right? When we're saying, I want to do my hair, I want to do my nails, I want to do my makeup, I want to do, wear a nice outfit. It's not as simple as saying, stop being a bum. It's not as simple as saying, get up and go do the things that are good for you. Because if you were shamed for those things, if you were shamed for having too much attention, if you were shamed for being fast or somehow trying to get attention from boys or whatever, right? If your dysfunctional mother was saying these things to you, the process of trying to put yourself together and that subconscious part of you that's like, it's not safe to do that, it is not as easy as just saying, have a vision board of what you want to look like and go do it. There is going to be some unpacking and unlearning that you might have to do in order for it to feel safe for you to put on lipstick, to do your nails, to wash your hair. Put yourself together in a way that gets attention, even if that's not what you're trying to seek. The same thing applies for inviting luxury into your life or expanding your levels of what it means to have luxury in your life. When you have dysfunctional mothers who are constantly trying to diminish what it means to be successful or have nice things in your life, these things will be under attack. If you decide that you want to spend money on certain material items, when you have a mother who is like this, these are the things that they act like are irrelevant and you shouldn't have them. It's selfish, it's greedy for you to have them. So this is why we see people who don't take care of the things that they have. They'll buy nice things and then literally not take care of them. It's not as simple as saying they just don't value those things or they're lazy. Sometimes there is a psychological element to it. Now, this is obviously not everybody's situation because you want to use your discernment and what applies to you to take it and use it, and if it doesn't, to let it go. But there are many of us who struggle with that, who struggle with the idea of spending more on yourself than you normally would. There are many of us who the money that we make should be going into our siblings, into our families, or into other people. That's acceptable. That was praised. But the idea of spending money on yourself makes you selfish. This is why you see some of these friendships that are completely out of whack, imbalanced, where you have a friend who's constantly paying for things, and then you have friends who are constantly taking. As someone who's had friendships like this, I can tell you, they had dysfunctional relationships with their mothers. And sometimes it's actually interesting because you can have someone who had almost constant love bombing from their mother because that mom wanted to live vicariously through that child. So they'll give them more of the love that's available in the house. And then that child goes out into the world and almost demands for that same level of attention from their friendships. But when that child transitions over into being a full-fledged adult, that same level of love bombing is not always present when those kids become 25 and up year olds. And so you'll find women who literally do not know how to function in life because the crutches that their mother gave them are no longer available. And then you can have women who were constantly being made to feel like you're not doing enough in this mother-daughter relationship. And then those become the friends in those imbalanced relationships that are paying for everything, that are doing everything, that are trying to pacify this hard to please individual. This is why having boundaries is so important, and the ability to communicate what you're feeling and why you're feeling it, even if the only person you can do it with is yourself, it's so important. Having conversations with yourself, whether it's things that you journal or things that you're saying out loud, it's a voice note, it's something that you just jot down, typing it in your phone. Knowing what you're feeling and why gives you the ability to identify areas that you need to set better boundaries. And again, this is not to shame ourselves, because if we're not taught what a boundary looks like or that it can be respected, it's hard to create that. And oftentimes the first person to gaslight you out of feeling what you feel, if that is your mother, if she is using emotional manipulation constantly to make you feel sorry for her and to center her and her existence, it's only natural that you will go out into the world and think that it is completely normal to have friendships, partnerships, any kind of relationship that mirrors that dysfunction. Now, one of the hardest things is to realize that you are never going to get acknowledgement or an apology for a lot of these things. And sometimes that can stall our growth because we feel, there's a part of us that feels like you almost have to hold on to that anger because it keeps you safe. And we wouldn't necessarily say it out loud like this, but subconsciously, that's what our brain is trying to do. It's trying to keep us safe. And oftentimes, what keeps you safe? Remembering how someone hurt you, remembering why you're angry, and then holding them accountable. And even if they're not around, holding on to your anger like a torch, helping you navigate through the darkness, you'll hold on to it like a badge of honor. And the ability to put that down is really difficult. It takes a lot of courage. And if you think of that part of yourself as being the inner child within you, the part of you where it was first implanted as a normal occurrence in your life, being able to envision that version of yourself and telling them that it is safe to put this down. It's safe to not have this resentment. that holding on to the memory is not harming that other person, it's only harming you. Can allow us to comfortably let go of things that do make us heavy. I'm not saying that as you revisit these things that they don't have the ability to create heavier emotions or disturb your peace at certain points. But if we remember that the healing is like a spiral and you are ascending and you are expanding and you're not revisiting the same point and behaving the same way every single time, it'll give you the courage to keep going. Because even now, as I revisit certain memories, I don't have the same emotional response that I used to. I don't feel the same way about it that I used to. And I am able to understand and hold grace for the people who did some absolute damage in my life. Women I did not know personally, women who went out of their way to seek and destroy my life, my happiness, my joy, and I genuinely don't feel anything towards them. And that's a powerful place to be in. But it took courage to let go of certain things, to train my subconscious brain into thinking and realizing that it didn't necessarily keep me safe now at this space to hold on to those things. It did before. And I've said this in previous videos. I had to say certain things in the way that those parts of myself that needed to be healed, the way that they wanted to say it. I had to acknowledge that. And you will have to do the same thing. The hardest part is knowing that sometimes those people are not going to be in the room while you're having these conversations. You want them to be held accountable. But this is not your fight. And this is where faith for me came in. This is where my relationship with God came in. And whatever relationship you have with a higher power, that's where it needs to come in so that you can let it go. Because your ability to take off, to soar, to see the endless possibilities of what is possible for you is not planted in your traumas. Your traumas cannot come with you. You want to leave them where they are. Because a lot of things served a purpose in our life. Whether it helped you establish better boundaries, whether it helped you see yourself more clearly, communicate your emotions more clearly, they all served a purpose. Every horrible thing I've ever been through, I look back on it now and I can say, I am truly grateful for what I experienced. I would not recommend going back through it, okay? 0 out of 10. But I also understand that it was my ability to see it differently that is allowing me to use it as fertilizer for new ground instead of being grave sites for where my dreams could have been. So whether you choose to use this new space to love yourself a little deeper, change your appearance without fear, go after your dreams that you didn't say out loud because you were embarrassed, take a trip, learn a new language, take a cooking class, travel, whatever it was that your younger self wanted to do but was too embarrassed or thought it was stupid because your mother told you it was dumb. Whatever part of yourself needs healing because of that relationship with your mom, I hope that you're able to acknowledge it and that it doesn't hold you back anymore. Because the ability to take things further than our mothers did, the ability to build a better life for our daughters, for our sons, for ourselves, sometimes requires us to leave the people we love behind. And although that process is not easy, sometimes it's what you deserve. And the life that you desire is on the other side of acknowledging what is best for you. So I encourage you to allow yourself to see things a little bit differently, to change your perspective and shift it a little more to the left or to the right so that the things that you desire can become clear to you, so that the healing process is not something that holds you back, but helps you soar.